We are now recording. Awesome. My name is Lenny, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am thrilled to introduce you to today's event with J.D. Jahn, reading from the Crone's Tales, Fables for New Times, which released March 15th. Dave Buckhout, reading from the regular, forthcoming the 22nd of this month. Aaron Rowe, reading from Saints and Martyrs, released on April 1st. And Wanda Maureen Miller, reading from Madeleine, Last French Casquette Bride in New Orleans, which also released April 1st. All 4 titles can be pre-ordered or purchased through your local bookstores and online via IndieBound, Book Depository, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. And of course, the books can be ordered on Atmosphere Press's website at atmospherepress.com/books. We do have some links in the chat, so feel free to click them, copy them, whatever you would like to do. The reading will conclude with time for your questions. At that time, if you have a question for our authors, please use the raise hand button that can be found in the reactions tab, which is directly below your screen. I'll call on you, ask you to unmute, and you can just go ahead and ask away. If you're shy, go ahead and type the question in chat. I'll be monitoring it. And please, if it's a question to one particular author, please do go ahead and address them. And just thank you. Thank you for being here today and supporting JD and Dave and Aaron and Mo. We are at Atmosphere. We appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we'd love to read it. So please send it to us. Submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com. That link will also be in the chat. As you may have experienced, over the last year of virtual events, technical issues can happen. And if they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. Thank you in advance for your patience. During the reading, please keep yourselves muted to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. And after all of our readers have read, I'll go ahead and ask us all to unmute so we can cheer and clap. And in the meantime, please do feel free to use the chat for praise and yays and comments and anything you'd like to share with us. What do you think? Shall we get to it? Are we ready? Are we ready to hear some good fiction? All right. It gives me great pleasure to introduce all of our readers. First up today is J.D. Jahn. The Crone's Tales is J.D. Jahn's first published work of fiction. A native of Iowa, he studied British literature in college and graduate school and went on to teach English literature as an assistant professor of English. Gerald then served as a writer, editor, and director of communications for several college and university foundations. Now retired, he lives in Florida with his wife, who shares his love of England and of murder mysteries. Jahn is finishing up a second collection of Crone's Tales and co-authoring with his wife a murder mystery set in Brooklyn, New York. Without further delay, I give you J.D. Jahn. Jer, once I find your name in the list,
okay,
the virtual podium's yours.
Thank you, Lenny. Thanks for that great introduction. I appreciate it. And I also wanted to give a shout out to the gang at Atmosphere Press, Nick and Cameron and everybody for making this event possible. It's great to be here, and it's great to be back in touch with my good friends and writing colleagues, Dave and Aaron, and the ever glamorous Wanda Maureen or Mo Miller back there. So today I thought I'd read a selection from the Crone's Tales. Here's what the book looks like, in case you need to see what the cover is. I should say that most of the tales, all of the tales in the Crone's Tales are written in the manner and in imitation of traditional fairy tale or folk tale styles. So you'll recognize a lot of those elements as you hear the story. But most of them tackle things that are more contemporary in terms of their themes. Questions of raising teenagers, how to sustain happiness in a marriage. There's one about medicine and medical advances and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to blend in the collection some old traditions with some fresh takes on it. The particular story I'm going to read today is about how to choose the right husband, which I guess is a problem we all face at some time or other. And I should note one other thing. Whoops, your thing fell out. I should note one other thing, and that is the voice you'll hear is the voice of the old woman who speaks in a early modern English vernacular. So it might take you a moment or two for your ear to adjust to the rhythms of her speech, but once you do, I'm sure you'll find it as much fun as I did. So without further ado, tale the 26th, The Princess and Her Suitors 3. Once, not so very long ago, there lived a princess as fair as is a summer's day. Like flame were her flowing tresses, her form supple as a willow, and her bright eyes were as sapphires blue. Throughout her father's fiefdom, each and all did sing her praises, and she was courted by 3 bold and handsome suitors. As is the way of things in such tales as these, their curly locks were all honey blonde or noble brows. Their chests were broad and their shoulders wide, their chins were cleft, and the light in their eyes danced like the sun on the teal blue waves of the sea. Equal were they in fortune, age, and birth. And therefore was the poor princess, though flattered by this embarrassment of worthy suitors, at great pains o'er which or how to choose amongst them. The princess felt like she was the proverbial donkey between 2 equally desirable bales of hay, so she turns to her to her mother, the queen, for advice, and the queen remembers that when she was in a similar predicament, she asked the old woman who dwells deep within the forest for help. So we'll skip ahead to that section. That very eve, as a silver sliver of moon slid behind a murky cloud and a hush fell o'er the night fowl, a shadowy figure did steal into the princess's bedchamber, wherein awaited the queen and her fair but trembling daughter. "'Tis good to see thee again, madam," said this witch. "All's well as goes well, I ween." "Well, well enough with me," replied the queen, "but alas, it goes ill with my daughter, the princess here. For she is in a poor maid's quandary and in sore need of help to select a husband." "Ah, I see," said the crone, eyeing the cringing princess narrowly. "Husbands do be difficult to choose and then to manage, I well know. Goodness, my share of them I've seen for certain. Be thee not afeard, my pretty, for help and succor I am here to provide." The old woman then took the princess's dainty chin in her gnarled fingers and gazed into her chalk-white face. "3 there be, I perceive," said she after a moment's inspection, "and they be rather hard to tell apart, it seems. This be a fine kettle of fish, for thou must decide with which of them to spend thy happily ever afters." "Well now, rest thou easy, for I have a plan." "Do tell," urged the queen. The crone's plan is very simply to spend a night with each of the 3 suitors and then come back with her judgment on the 4th night. As you can probably imagine, the princess finds this rather objectionable. "But sure as sunrise they shall see thou art not I," sputtered the princess, eyeing the hag's humped form, wiry hair, and wrinkled skin. "Be not anxious on that point," simpered that old Amazon with a coy smile. "For have I not craft and magic enough? That aside, young men, when they are about to spend a night in the company of their beloveds, do not oft, in my experience, peer too closely at the mare they've been gifted." By these and like arguments assuring the preservation of her dignity and her honor, the princess was quieted, and the queen and the witch set their gin in motion the very next night but 2. As midnight struck, the first suitor was ushered secretly into the princess's bedchamber, where, veiled and perfumed, awaited a gracious form. Passionate as the tides was this suitor, and the dark hours flew by in wild abandonment with sighs and cries. Too old for this, I am getting, sighed the crone wearily as the first suitor crept out ere dawn's rosy light. On the second night came suitor the second, and he was gamesome and light, full of jibes and gossip of the court and town. In laughter and in jest, with foreheads pressed close together, did these two make the tedious hours run. On the third night appeared the final suitor, with a kerchief stained by tears in his manly hand. Ere the first light of dawn, he had poured forth all the secrets of his heart, its dark fears and fond dreams, as water is poured forth upon sere ground. Then laid he his curly brow upon the fake princess's heaving breast, and listened with sympathetic ear like to no other, to all her hastily contrived thoughts, dreams, and fears. Upon his departure, did the old crone sigh wearily unto herself, too old as well for all that sharing I am getting. So the fourth night rolls around, and the crone returns to make her judgment. Thy choice, dear girl, 'tis plain as the wart upon my nose, observed the crone. If thou wouldst spend thy days in perfect mutual understanding, why then the third suitor is the perfect he for thee. Shouldst thou yearn instead for passionate love sans respite, why then choose suitor number one. Howe'er, if 'tis boon companionship, like e'en that of a brother, thou doth wish, one to laugh with o'er the foibles and follies of the world, why bachelor number two is the best boy for thee. Thereat sighed the princess, all downcast. High were my hopes of thee, old woman, yet now I fear thy arts be much o'errated. Shall I not want each and all of those things in a husband, be he prince or common as the clay? Alas, here betwixt two, or rather three, bales of hay stand I still. Then the fairest of the fair sat down upon the cold marble floor of her chamber, with her perfect mouth in a pretty pout, and her eyes a brimming like a baptismal font, with tears as clear as glass. Well, the queen will have nothing to do with this, and demands that the crone come up with another solution, which the crone, being the witch that she is, readily does. And she instructs the princess into how to carry out this second plan. That very day but one were the three exceedingly perfect suitors summoned to the palace yard, wherein the princess waited. There she asked each what he would vow to win her hand and heart forever. I should adore thee all the days of thy life and beyond, swore the first suitor, passion aflame in his teal blue eyes. I should bring thee joy and laughter to lighten thy days and illume thy darkest nights, even to the end of time, said the second suitor, with a fraternal smile bright as the noonday sun. Said the third with an earnest face, with me at thy beauteous side, ne'er shalt thou for a moment doubt my constancy nor deep intent, for I shall ope my troubled heart and mind unto thee freely all the days of our lives. Then the happy princess whispered into each suitor's perfect ear the exact words the old woman had taught her. Each suitor paused and looked askance at his fellows, afore replying, Yea, e'en that I will undertake, if such be thy desire. At which the princess's smile was like old Sol arising from his dewy bed upon a morn in May. At the wedding of the princess, the bells did carol their triumphant song, and the people of the fiefdom did raise their loud huzzahs. Yet aside they asked one of the other, which one is the he that she hath chosen? I cannot tell, truth to say, was the common answer. For, so far as I can, the three were so like unto a pot of peas that she shall be as content with the one as with t'other. So instead turned they, with no further ado, to the ale and sweet delights the king and the queen had lavished before them in celebration of their daughter's wedding. And from that day forth, the princess did live in perfect happiness. Each day at dawn, she unlocked a hoary wardrobe sitting in her bedchamber, using the silver key that she alone did keep upon a silken thread about her neck. Upon three hooks within that upright chest hung three shadows, each one gray as smoke. Then did the princess whisper to herself, which husband shall be mine this day? What be the mood I'm in? As she took one or the other of the shadows off its hook and breathed life into its willing lips. So there you have it, the tale of the princess and her suitors three. I'm sure that some of you recognized some of the fairy tale elements common in that, the beautiful princess, a repetition of three actions with very dissimilar results. And I would bet also that some of you recognize the allusion to the, I think it may still be on TV, the show where the young woman gets to choose among her bachelor suitors. So all of those things and more are packed into my tales. And with that, I'll turn it over to, I guess Dave is going to be next. Lenny, is that right? Thank you.
Yes.
Well done, Jerry.
Great job, Jer. Dave, you're next. Before you go, I'm going to introduce you, okay? All right. Dave Buckhout's novel, The Regular, will be celebrating its book birthday the 22nd of this month, which is very exciting. Dave Buckhout is a writer of short fiction and long fiction, creative nonfiction, history, and verse. Having begun with semi-automatic writings pulled from observing the whirling scenes and random scraps of substance to be found from this wonderful mad world of ours, Dave moved through short fiction, travelogues, historical essays and meditations, verse, and more verse, before finally wrapping a full-length novel. Published works of all the above preceded The Regular, and nonfiction adventures Ghost on the Hill, My Life in the Civil War, and Through will follow. Dave lives with his beautiful wife on the hip east side of Atlanta in a house filled with dogs, cats, guitars, and thousands of well-worn books. Stay tuned at davebuckhout.com. Dave, it's all you, dude.
Great. Thanks, Lenny. And hopefully you won't be hearing the dogs and cats version of that bio. Quite possible, but I think we have it under wraps. Anyways, thanks so much, Lenny. Thanks, Cammie. Thanks to Nick and Kyle and everyone at Atmosphere. It's just been a really fantastic experience, topped off by grouping me with this wonderful group of folks. I feel like I've got my writers gang here with me, Aaron and Jerry and Mo. And it's been a real treat getting to know them, their styles, reading their works, especially talking about how we do things, life in general. It's been really great, kind of its own built-in support system. So thanks to everyone that showed up tonight too. I see my brother, I see my good friend Stacy out there. How you doing all? So I'm going to read. It's a kind of a mix of reading and let's just say I'm op-editing a little bit on my own piece. Again, The Regular. A new dawn breaks. The haze is fine mesh gauze. Steam loiters as it would about a geyser field. It is felt, implied, seen. Eyes open on this morning, a day staunch in its midsummer promise. August arising, mercury aspiring, sucking mist through indolent filters of humidity. It hints at the broiler to come, the fight ahead. For it is here in this forgotten urban hood, once the grandest of them all, where the city wreathes a homegrown prodigy, a wandering guru hunkered down in the haze. To one Marvin Goodspeed, this here is home. It can be hard to know where to start with this Goodspeed. Waking up on a sidewalk half drunk offers much to go on, but we can't be let off the hook so easily. At first glance, The Regular is a story about an alcoholic wordsmith who, having struck a vein with his off-kilter style, continues to ply its mysterious logic in executing his craft. But thanks to the keen observation of a local city beat journalist, the aperture widens and the book settles in as a larger metaphor for a region running thick with contradictions, a place that can seem incapable of reconciling the old and what is past with the new and its inevitable future. Enter one Cyrus Cleburne, journalist for the city's alternative newspaper, The Weekly. Cleburne is a keen observer of this little corner of the beacon of the New South, its facts and fictions in tandem and in conflict. It is a promising combustible fuel, and in one Marvin Goodspeed, he may well have tapped a gusher. For this Goodspeed is a man on a mission, or is it an anti-mission? Having embraced the thundering contradictions, he defends them as he rails against them. And we will come to suspect that he knows this all well enough, not just triangulating the coordinates where the survey line of real v-myth falls, but purposefully leaping back and forth across that boundary as if a porous wormwood fence put up only for show. Here's where Cyrus Cleburne will zero in, that DMZ separating who we are from who we think we are. This book plies the thoroughfares of alcoholism, writing, being a Southerner, and how all three fill the mash bill of one man's unique spin on victory. It is a documentary, but one that peddles fact and fiction as it digs the deeper strata of truth. It does not aim to settle anything, only to shine hot light on the dichotomy that most people hold within them and often hold on to for dear life, if only out of a fear of the new. For the regular sits at a crossroads in the evolution of the modern South, the mid to late 90s. The old is finally losing hold of the narrative, the new just about poised to assert itself, to break away from the old. But it is not there, not yet. There's a reckoning in the works, one whose particulars we still find ourselves fighting over all these years later, against modernity, against change. This place could not then, and in many ways still cannot, bring itself to commit fully. And though a new and sudden fame had found Goodspeed, it had changed nothing insofar as his duty was concerned. There was still the maintenance of the routine to consider. Enter the Asa Inman Blue Ribbon Buffet, where said routine is tended. Stale and stoned, it is a living apparition. In here, one could accept Sputnik or Tet as the day's headlines. For time, we will find, is rendered irrelevant here, relegated to just another amongst the calcified patrons drowning a thirst or a doldrum. It is a victory of sorts, these regulars giving time the slip, if only for an afternoon or an evening. But to the keen eye, one can also cite a spirited defense at work. It may often seem like little more than the pensive pursuit of silent drinking, but therein lay commitment to that most noble goal, snapping into bold italics what lay beyond question, the maintenance of things as they are. Within the confines of the Asa Inman, we see this whole regional experiment play out, for better, for worse. Goodspeed raises a fingered V, as in victory, gains the barkeep Howard's attention. Howard nods, fixes a sequel to the empty glass. It is a popular tactic. The few others at the bar, Ez, Boo, Judy, Sang, and Chuck, employ similar strategies. It is their time to waste. It is freedom. It is noon. At its core, the regular is about more than a man. It is about the man for sure, but it is also this story of the old and the new, and their seeming inability to live peaceably with one another. How the old can seem incapable of handing things off to what is next, and how this push and pull has a distorting effect, the old forcing itself on the new, over and over, generation after generation, creating a distortion so wide and normal seeming that everything falls into it. Confused and jumbled, the truths have to claw their way out. Sometimes they fail to do so. Sometimes they do, but only as a mashup of what is real and what is myth. And as abstract as that all might sound, it pegs Marvin Goodspeed and the environment in which he lives, pegs them to a T. For this is a man and a place having taken in the myths so deeply that they are convinced myth may be the only truth one really needs. In The Mind of the South, W.J. Cash wrote, "The poor farmer, the thing that sent him swinging up the slope at Gettysburg was before all else, more or less than his conviction, the conviction that nothing living could cross him and get away with it." Now, if this here isn't Goodspeed's guiding decree, we'll find ourselves hard pressed to define what is. obsessed with ignoring the expectations of a societal order that piques his nature, crosses him at every turn. This regular marches on, defiant, irreverent, a one-man picket's charge, giving sure oblivion the finger. Cyrus Cleburne, our good journalist, will come to see all of this through clear eyes. He will come to recognize this Goodspeed character as a stand-in for the South circa 1990s, a place already pluralistic, accepting, multiracial, whether it cares to admit it or not. All of the progress and all of the retrograde, the lurching forward and back, the baked-in environmental thoughts, sayings, instincts, all of the good, all of the bad, all the contradictions held in the same regional headspace. It is a place that wants to improve, and it is a place that has no interest in improving. It is a place where the contradictions themselves have become instinctual. Enter the power of myth. The hold that myth can have is like religion. To lose myth is to lose religion, a loss of identity. Some minds cannot bend without breaking. And so they drift into an often extreme alternate reality instead. In this frame, the cloud of alcoholism can come to resemble a tool. Inside that cloud, reality can be sculpted as one wants. Here is a region so haunted by its past, so much of it sloshing around in the everywhere, day-to-day of the place, that it is hard, even for those actively trying, to fully escape. And so, the clouding, alternate real effects of alcohol settle in as Goodspeed's chosen vehicle for upholding myths in the face of devastating truths. Shovel in the white-hot coal of character and environment, compress the bellows of fact meets fiction. Nature will have its way. Make no mistake, it will have its vulgar way with you. So knowing that, why not revel in it? Why not roll about in the filthy business? Thrash about in it madly. Live the truth. Live the myth as if it were truth. Love with vigor, hate with vigor, drink with a vigor some might confuse for virtue. William B. Huey wrote a work of fiction called Mud on the Stars. In it, the incorrigible old Miss Ella counseled, get you some things to love and some things to hate, and then love them and hate them with all your soul. A lodestar decree that pegs the very nature of one Marvin Goodspeed to a T. Thanks all.
Dave, you're such a Rod Serling. I just keep
You said that
hearing
last
Rod
week.
Serling.
It's
It's
hilarious.
amazing.
I'll take it.
Yeah, it's great. And I just want to comment, I did see Cammie's question, and I've got that written down to ask. But I just can't help but hear a little bit of Bukowski in your work. So that's
that's interesting. I mean, we'll wait for the Q&A for that. Comes up a lot.
absolutely. Sorry, I get excited and ahead of myself, you know. I'm a book nerd and a writer too, so it's like
Yeah, I get the Bukowski thing. It's a question that I can answer. But later. I'm now.
Awesome. I'll bring it back. I'll bring
Yes.
Bukowski back.
Yep.
Okay.
For now, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend in the great province of Alberta, Mr. Aaron Rowe.
Yay. Yay, Aaron. Aaron is
Hi.
next in our fiction extravaganza. Aaron Francis Rowe teaches English and communications at Bow Valley College. He lives with his family in Calgary, Alberta. Saints and Martyrs is his first novel. Aaron, go for it.
All right. So I entered a Catholic seminary the day after I graduated from private Catholic school. I grew up in a devout home, Catholic family, and I decided to pursue priestly ordination. It was what Catholics refer to as vocation, the calling that was perhaps most esteemed. And I've always enjoyed feeling like I'm held in high esteem of others. And so maybe that was part of it, but I pursued priestly studies, priestly formation for a period of 6 years, a tumultuous and really devastating time, terribly sad time in the church. I entered in 1999, and so near the end of my the Boston scandals came out, and so on and so forth. I decided to leave after 6 years in the seminary, and I pursued other things. 14 years ago to the month, someone at a dinner party mentioned to me how she found my stories of when we were at barbecues and so on, stories about the seminary interesting, and that perhaps I could pursue a project, something like John J. Osborne's Paper Chase, an insider's view. He was a student at Harvard Law School, and he wrote The Paper Chase, and then that was a movie, and then a mediocre TV show. An insider's view, semi-autobiographical, but then ultimately a work of fiction. So the idea for this book actually came from someone else, and I thought I'd give it a try. Now, it hasn't been 14 years of steady work, but it has been quite a long time. So this is pretty cool, actually. I feel like something's wrapping up here. Something is concluding a chapter, at least, of my life, and I'd like to share with you the opening chapter, most of it, of my novel. So, as I mentioned, some of this is based on personal experience. I think it would be fair to say this is a semi-autobiographical novel, but it's in the third person. My young protagonist is Damien Kurt. He lost his father tragically about 4 years before the story begins. He believes his dad is a saint who is in heaven, and so Damien's goal is to become a saint as well, and thus reunite with his beloved father in heaven. That leads him to a seminary, and that's where growth and acceptance and uncomfortable realizations, uncomfortable truths help him to mature. But this is my opening chapter called Original Sin. Christ appeared dejected, which made Damien feel guilty. He was studying mathematics in his basement bedroom and struggling to ignore the erection that pressed painfully against his tight uniform pants. When the mailbox outside clanked shut, he looked up from his textbook to the crucifix hanging above his desk. Maybe it's just my math module, Lord, he prayed. He caressed Christ's pierced feet and sincerely tried to hope that the schoolwork he'd mailed to the Alberta Homeschooling Center last month had returned graded. But surely Christ and Damien's deceased father in heaven knew that deeply, secretly, he wanted the Bay's catalog to have arrived. Gazing down from above, they'd seen him fight off lustful thoughts the past few weeks, and they knew as well as he did that the Bay delivered its spring edition in February. So, with today being the end of the month, trying to hide his desire was futile. He felt like Judas as he kissed the crucifix before rising from his desk. But his bedroom, like everywhere in Grandma Scheller's house, was so crowded that when he shoved back his chair, it hit the bed he shared with his 5-year-old brother James, and it crashed to the cement floor. Damn it, he said. Then immediately he held his breath, worried that his family upstairs had heard him curse. Already 6'3" tall at 17, his head nearly touched the basement's low, drooping ceiling. He raised himself onto his toes, pressed his ear against the molding, paper-thin ceiling panel, and listened carefully. Darwin was known to cheat at backgammon. his mother was telling James and his two sisters, Mary, 7, and Bernadette, 12, educating them in the same Bible stories, creation science, and warnings about socialism that he'd received at their age, which reveals his moral character and cast doubt on his theory. Her voice hadn't wavered, so he sighed, relieved, but didn't yet lower himself from the ceiling. In case one of his siblings had heard him curse and felt inclined to tattle, he said loudly, "I mean, darn!" There was momentary silence upstairs. They had heard him that time. But his mother was unwilling to interrupt her teaching from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. on weekdays, and she resumed, "Fossils, despite what some experts claim." He could have recited the lesson verbatim. He lowered himself from the festering ceiling and wiped the mold from his ear. The slimy black dots smeared across his hand. How could something so disgusting figure into an intelligently designed world? Perhaps the smear was an omen, marking his hand that would likely soon lead him to sin. He could cut it off and pluck out his eyes, guarding himself from temptation. He could pray to his Father for spiritual strength and try to hold out against lust for another day. Or he could run upstairs, tell his mother he was checking the mailbox for schoolwork, and then, whatever happened, confess to Father Dennis, his parish priest, tomorrow. His frustration in this cramped, molding house made some relief necessary. He cleaned his hand with a tissue, hoping that sin could be as easily removed from a soul, then picked up his chair, which miraculously wasn't broken, and hurried from the room before guilt held him back. As he crossed the crowded basement, dodging lawn furniture, graying stacks of the National Catholic Register, and towers of rain-wrinkled encyclopedias, his mother's voice traveled clearly through the ceiling. Pressing his ear against it had been needless, an anxious act. Now he knew the mold had been an omen, a harbinger of sin. His desire persisted, however, so he moved faster. The ancient stairs creaked under his 250 pounds. At the top, he threw open the door, forgetting his strength and his anxiety over his soul, his eagerness to reach the mailbox. The door crashed against the kitchen wall. "Damien!" his mother yelled from the living room. He stood in the doorway, crossing his hands in fig leaf position, trying to appear contrite, but also hiding his erection from his siblings, who sat in a neat row, making him feel guiltier yet with their wide, innocent eyes. Bernadette and Mary, hands clasped on top of their desks, wore matching gray jumpers, long brown hair and pigtails, and starched white shirts with Peter Pan collars. James's hair, dark brown as his father's had been, was parted to the side and slicked down. He wore a white, short-sleeved, collared shirt, a navy tie, a red cardigan, and gray slacks that fit him well. Damien's version of the same clothes was tight and uncomfortable, particularly in his present state. His thin, pale mother wore her chestnut hair in a bun, and her starched blouse and gray skirt were so flat she matched the blackboard she stood before, chalk in hand. She'd mounted the blackboard on the wall 4 years ago, just after his father died. Damien had helped her hang it, doing what his father would have done, except he'd hung it slant. Since then, his always pious mother had heightened her fervor, no longer checked by his father's calming presence, and their family life became a flurry of mass, prayers, catechetical instruction, and readings from Butler's Lives of the Saints. They hadn't bothered to adjust it. The crooked blackboard, he often thought, seemed to belong in a house that had suffered an upheaval and had never been restored to order. He stepped forward, stopping at the edge of the kitchen, where the curled squares of smoke-stained linoleum gave way to the worn beige carpet that demarcated Grandma Schiller's living room, or, as his mother had named it since moving her children into the house, the Academy of the Immaculate Conception. She said, "What have I told you about slamming doors?" "Not to," he replied, slightly sarcastic. He anticipated her next question by readying the answer he'd prepared downstairs. "Where are you going?" "Mail. My math module." "Why now?" "To review it for mistakes," he said. "To improve for," he pointed up, implying God. He didn't want to take the Lord's name in vain, because perfection in God's eyes, his family's constant goal, wasn't driving him to the mailbox that afternoon. And since he'd already cursed downstairs, possibly giving a bad example to his siblings through the basement ceiling, he didn't want to add blasphemy and lying to the sins he'd confessed tomorrow. His mother, however, seemed to interpret his gesture differently, in a way that furthered her designs on him, which had been growing increasingly insistent of late. She said, "To prepare yourself for seminary?" He suddenly grew angry. Why did she try to control him like this? While the priesthood attracted him with its commitments to prayer and celibacy, her pressure spoiled its appeal. But he wanted to avoid conflict right now, so he resigned himself to her manipulation, at least for the moment, and said, "Yeah, the seminary. Probably." She furrowed her brow, showing she acknowledged the legitimacy of his quest. "Next time, wait till we're done." He nodded and hurried past his siblings. He opened the foyer door and then quietly shut it behind him so his mother had no further grounds to criticize his disruption. Inside, stagnant clouds of Grandma Schiller's smoke filled the dark, cramped space, and the afternoon sun beat against the tightly tinfoiled windows, so that, though it was frigid outside, the air within sweltered like hell. As he waited for his eyes to adjust, coughing and waving his hand before his face, Grandma Schiller mumbled prayers from across the foyer. "Hi, Grandma." "Damien," she said, her gentle German voice soothing after his mother's loud reprimands. Why was his mother so harsh compared to her mother? One day he'd asked Grandma Schiller, "Saint Anthony, patron of lost things, help us find God's path to salvation." Her pious words and cigarette smoke hung in the air like incense. Though he could only see shadows now, he knew from crossing Grandma Schiller's space, when the door was open or the light on, that the walls around her were covered with brightly colored holy cards, small rectangles of laminated paper with saints drawn on the front and intercessory prayers on the back. Grandma Schiller claimed to have memorized these prayers decades ago, and now the words faced the wall, leaving the drawings on display. He'd studied them so closely when he'd moved in, he could now picture them vividly. The images of long beards, flowing robes, knotty staffs, uplifted eyes, pale complexions, and thin floating halos haunted him because they reminded him of his father, whom he considered a saint as well. According to family lore, his father had died without having committed a mortal sin, and so they believed he was in heaven and could see them always, something Damien cherished, except for times like now, when his intentions were shameful. And I'm going to wrap it up there. The image of the holy cards. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. That was great. Last and certainly not least is Wanda Maureen Miller. Wanda Maureen Miller or Mo, grew up on an Arkansas farm in the 1940s and 50s, got educated, moved to California, and taught college English. She has published 6 books, a historical romance, The French, 3 textbooks, Reading Faster and Understanding More, books 1, 2, and 3, her slightly fictionalized memoir, Last Trip Home, and now book 1, Madeleine, Last French Casquette Bride in New Orleans. Retired, she plays pickleball and is working on book 2, Solange, daughter of Last French Casquette Bride in New Orleans. Find out more at wandamaureenmiller.wordpress.com. Mo, take it away.
Thank you, thank you, Lenny. Thank you. I just want to say something about Atmosphere Press first. As you can tell, I've had a long life, and I have had the publishing experience 15 times. My 3 textbooks went into 5 different editions. So I have a lot of experience with publishing. Most of it was with traditional publishers. And I want to say, and they didn't bribe me to say this, but this has been my pleasantest and easiest publishing experience ever. And if you have joined us late, you might notice that I'm wearing sunglasses. I'm not trying to look all Hollywood and glamorous. I can't anyway. But I have a hemorrhage in my left eye, and I don't want to frighten you while I read. So this new book of mine, Madeleine, I have no idea where that shows up on the screen, or if it did. It begins at a dock in France, 1728. The main character is a beautiful 17-year-old sitting in a carriage with her employer, the Countess de Mandeville. Madeleine is waiting to board a ship to take her and 59 other filles à la Casquette to New Orleans. They have been paid by the French government to marry French men there to settle them down and keep them from running off into the woods after Indian squaws. Their dowries and belongings are all in these casquettes or small trunks. This part of the book is based on a historical event. When Madeleine boards the ship and checks in, the clerk is so bedazzled by her beauty and poise that he mistakes her words of the de Mandeville Chateau for her last name. She decides not to correct him and to pretend she is an aristocrat instead of a poor pleasant girl. And now, reading from chapter 4, while Madeleine is still on this ship, Madeleine fell against the railing as a huge wave drenched the docks. With one hand, Captain Bouchot grabbed her around the waist to keep her from falling down the ladder. The two of them swayed in the wind, taking comfort from each other's warmth. Madeleine, who had never been in a man's arms before, was amazed at how pleasant it was to lean against his hard chest. Madeleine, he said gruffly, why are you on this voyage to that God-forsaken Louisiana territory? You are beautiful and clever enough to find a husband in France, even if you are not a de Mandeville. Madeleine stiffened in shock, but remained in the protection of his arm. To his surprise, she did not pretend ignorance or indignation, but asked with resignation, "How did you know?" "I seem to recall the boarding clerk mistaking your name on the day we left. I was watching, do you not remember? I looked over the company's register of names. There is no de Mandeville, only a Madeleine Boucher, serf's daughter and servant of the de Mandevilles." Madeleine paled at his words. She lifted her head and tried to look at him in the darkness. The captain could feel her breath on his chin. If he lowered his head, he could kiss her. What do you intend to do, monsieur? What do you want from me? I will not beg you to keep my secret, nor will I give myself to you, she thought, straining away from his body as much as she could in his tight grip. But he did not let go. You silly chit, what do you think I want? He bellowed. Do you think I have to blackmail women into my bed? I don't give a damn if you are the Queen of France or a woman of the streets. Mon Dieu, I don't blame you for taking advantage of someone else's mistake. That was quick thinking. Our countrymen in Louisiana are as class snobbish as they are in France. Madeleine relaxed in his arms then. Why did you not continue to pretend? Why did you shame me? Ma petite, there is no shame in trying to be better than people think you are. The colonies are a good place to make a new start, but the French will forgive any lie except about family. That is sacred. Do you think you can carry it off? Oui, I can carry it off. I must carry it off. I will never again bow and scrape to anyone. She thought bitterly of her days at the estate. The captain rumbled a low laugh in his chest. I do believe you can. At any rate, no one will ever learn your secret from me. Merci, Capitaine. Madeleine lifted her head and grazed his cheeks with her lips. And now talking, but not reading, though the captain and Madeleine are drawn to each other throughout the book. Unfortunately, she marries an aristocratic French lieutenant who was unfaithful to her and drank and gambled away his salary. She had to use her farm girl skills to put his land grant under cultivation and made a profit. This did not endear her to her husband. Their always one-sided sex life became worse. He had a child with their slave, Rima, who felt so bad for childless and depressed Madeleine that she decided to sex her up. And reading again from chapter 27, Rima said to Madeleine, "Here, Miss Madeleine, put on your shawl. We going to take a walk in the woods. There's somebody I want you to see. She help you." Madeleine got up and followed her obediently. She did not seem to care where she went. They walked for an hour on Madeleine's land, deep into the woods, farther than Madeleine had ever been before. At last they reached a cove where a few cabins and tents were clustered. She saw only women, no men or children. Rima nodded to them as if she knew them and took Madeleine into the largest cabin. In front of a blazing fire with several overhanging pots stood a wizened-looking old woman with almond-shaped eyes. "Maddie," Rima said, "I brung you somebody needs your help. I owe her. She need a baby." Madeleine felt the old woman's eyes on her and was a little frightened. She started to leave, but Maddie seemed to draw her back with her willpower. She spoke to Madeleine soothingly. "Now, Jess, you relax, honey. We gonna fix you up." Madeleine sat down. Then Maddie turned to Rima. "Rima, you go tell the others to get everything ready. I'll mix the potion." She dipped into one of her pots, boiling in the fireplace, and added substances from some of the vials on a shelf. "Drink this, honey. It will make you feel better." Madeleine obeyed and found it to be a sweet but not cloying warm liquid that seemed to radiate heat all the way down. Madeleine felt more relaxed, almost dreamlike. Her limbs lost their stiffness and felt loose and limber. She was not sure how much time had passed when Maddie told her to get up and led her gently outside. The circle of women was seated around a fire right beside a small waterfall that splashed softly into a spring. Madeleine sat down beside Rima and grinned. "I feel wonderful, Rima." Rima smiled back at her. "You gonna feel a whole lot better, Miss Madeleine." Maddie brought a large gourd of a steaming liquid to the circle and passed it around. Each woman took a sip and passed it on. When it was Madeleine's turn to sip, Rima took it from her and passed it to the next person. "You don't need this, Miss Madeleine. We got something special for you." Madeleine did not argue. She sat and watched and listened. She didn't think she would ever argue or get upset about anything again. She felt at peace. And as Rima had promised, they did have something special for her. Maddie gave her a handful of unfamiliar smelling seeds to chew. How odd, she thought, but she obediently chewed the bitter tasting seeds and began to feel as if she were floating on a cloud. She felt weightless, yet she had never felt more clear-headed and aware of her body. She felt an overwhelming desire to touch her body parts. She started with her neck and stroked gently, enjoying this fine, smooth texture of her skin. She lightly ran her fingers over her breasts, waist, and thighs. She began to feel a slow liquid heat run through her body. She wished she could pull off her clothes and feel the heat of the fire on her body, then giggled at the thought. Maddie picked up a drum and started to beat a slow, soft rhythm. The women hummed in tune with this drum beat and started a slow, sinuous dance around the fire. At first, Madeleine just sat and swayed, a little in time with the rhythm. Then she felt irresistibly drawn to the circle of dancing women and joined a primitive, sensual dance that she seemed to have known all her life. She and the other women moved their bodies like snakes, as if they had no bones. Madeleine was aware of her body as never before. The heat within her continued to burn. As the drum beat faster, the humming turned into a musical blend of shouts, and the women moved faster and faster. Madeleine's hair came loose and fell about her face and shoulders. It felt like silk on her face. She turned her head this way and that to feel her hair slide over her skin a little better, over her nipples. The circle of women straightened out and formed a line of still moving bodies dancing toward the stream. Without speaking, as each woman got to the water's edge, she pulled off her clothes and waded in. Madeleine was fascinated as each strong, supple black body bared itself in the moonlight. She could barely wait for her turn. Still moving to the drum beat, she slipped out of her clothes with great relief. The air felt crisp and clean. The soft pout of her nipples disappeared and became rigidly erect. She thrust them out proudly and examined them with her hands as if she had never seen them before. When she walked into the water, she became aware of her body in a new way. The water lapped about her slender legs and buttocks. As the water caressed her hips, the heat intensified so that the water could not have cooled them if they had turned to ice. She bent her knees and felt the water lap around her breasts. She ran her hands around and around her breasts, brushing her nipples with her fingertips. She was so absorbed in her pleasure that she had almost forgotten the other women until Rima took her by the hand and led her into the waterfall. Rima, what a beautiful body you have. No wonder Jacques wanted you. Her own voice seemed as rich and smooth and slow as molasses. It poured sweetly out of her mouth. She stuck out her tongue and ran the tip over her lips to see if she could taste her voice. She noticed that the other women were bathing themselves and each other. She watched with fascination as a young, slender woman lathered the full, pendulous breasts of a larger one. The soap glistened on the dark skin. Madeleine could not take her eyes from a small bubble hanging precariously from a large nipple. She pursed her lips as if to blow the bubble away. Though she was too far away to have any effect, the bubble burst at that moment and left the wet, erect nipple free. As the woman tried to shake herself, her flesh jiggled madly, her huge breasts seemingly dancing in midair. Madeleine fancied that they moved to the beat of the still pounding drum. Then she and the other women returned to the fire. Soft hands massaged Madeleine and rubbed every place on her body, came near its recesses, but moved teasingly on. She closed her eyes and imagined these were men's hands touching her. She felt Jacques' hands, then Captain Bouchon's, then Governor Perrier's, then Jacques' again. How could she have thought his touching her was unpleasant? If only he would touch her like this. And telling again, very briefly, Madeleine was so turned on that night that she initiated sex with her husband for the first time, and her daughter, Solange, was conceived. Solange was even more beautiful than her mother and had bigger breasts, but she was not as virtuous. She is the subject of book 2, almost finished and already accepted for publication. Thank you.
Oh, Mo,
Sorry I went too long.
it's warm in here. Does anybody else feel a little warm? Ah! Let's go ahead before we open up to Q&A and like let's unmute and let's clap and let's celebrate because
Woo!
that was phenomenal.
Thank you so much. You're very kind.
Damien would have appreciated that. So I appreciate it. He rocked his world.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think a little bit about Damien.
Oh,
Red.
He would have had to pray a lot after that.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, indeed. Oh, wow. Wow, guys, that was everyone. That was phenomenal. It's 5 after 5. We've got tons of time. So let's go ahead and open it up to Q&A. If you have a question, please go ahead and click the raise your hand button and I'll be looking for the hands, or go ahead and type it in chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any yet. So I'm going to go ahead, and Cammie actually posted in the chat. Cam, do you want to ask or do you want me to go ahead and read it? I can read it. Okay, all right. Dave, this is to you. And this is from Cammie. This is such a unique narration style, this third person omniscient voiceover. I'm wondering how you came to it. Was this voice and rhythm there from the beginning, or did it evolve through the writing of the book? You're muted.
Mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, this all it all started off as a series of not really short stories, but short scenes. And but that voice was always there. And I think I was able to track that down the deeper I got into it, you know, kind of carved away the garbage of the early drafts and started to really hone in on things. And that voice was always there, and it really became a kind of a nice cement to stitch it all together. And you know, over various drafts, it just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I really feel like it is one person, one person's voice, but it feels to me like the accumulation of many voices in one. And I think that's just all the influences feeding in, you know, through the pen and onto the page. And maybe that gives it a little bit of its omniscient feel. It's not meant to be malicious in any way, shape, or form, but definitely omniscient. I would say that's an accurate read.
Do you mind if I ask about Bukowski?
Sure. So here's my stock answer to Bukowski. I wasn't in any way, shape, or form trying to follow the Bukowski model. If only because I'll be honest, like he can get on my nerves a little bit. It just runs in the same channel over and over and over again, and you know, when it isn't funny, it's just kind of depressing and sad. Doesn't have a lot of meat on the bones, but you know, like his poetry collection, War All the Time, is just phenomenal, and Post Office is just funny as hell. So there's a lot. Then of course Barfly, you know, the movie Barfly, is it's stellar. Like it's the writing. It's almost like he's a better playwright than a fictional author, I feel like. But I consciously tried to steer away from that, if only because I didn't want to draw those parallels too distinctly. Like I didn't want this to be a book simply about, you know, an alcoholic and his, you know, travails, and you know, skips on through his neighborhood and all the funny little stories he runs through. This had another deeper, darker, maybe more Southern Gothic flavor to it. So I consciously tried to turn that off, if that was an influence at all. I'm not really sure it was, but you know, when you dip into this territory, the connection to Bukowski it's unavoidable. So, you know, I'll take it for what's good in it.
Awesome, thank you. Dan Buckhout has a question, and it's for all of you. Many authors put something of themselves in their stories, part of their personality or personal experiences. Have you done that in your book? If so, how does it show up in your story? There's also another question, but I'll do that.
Aaron, I feel like you should start.
I began Saints and Martyrs actually as just due to my inexperience as a creative writer. I started it as a memoir, and the first chapter is in no way autobiographical, but then Damien is a weightlifter and he has a weightlifting accident. He ends up in the hospital and he goes to the seminary. And so the first half of the novel, essentially, it was a memoir. And then I was very wisely steered in the direction of fiction. And it had something to do with memory, which we discussed as a group in our last presentation, but I don't remember events with any reliable accuracy, and so it was just better to work with fiction. And so the second half of the book is entirely fiction. And I came up with the character, put it in third person, which I felt helped remove me from the memoir feel of a book. I would say this. At the time, like I said, I got the idea for the book 14 years ago. I was pretty disillusioned with the Catholic Church at that time, having recently left the seminary and all that was going on. And when I began the book, that feeling of disillusionment, and it was honestly, for devout Catholics to feel so betrayed, it was like losing a father. And I think that I put everything, all of myself into the book and into Damien, of who I was in my 20s and in my teens. And then, then it took a while for it to come out. It's like the worldview and the emotions and so on, that when I read the novel now, it seems like I recognize it, but it does seem removed. So I'd say, I heard Harold Bloom passed away about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and he said that every first novel is an autobiography of the artist, or something like this. It's some sort of portrait of the artist. That's what it was. And so for me, putting part of my life, personal experience into the book and using that as a springboard to a complete plot, a complete work of fiction, was just the way it worked for me.
Jared, did you want to?
In a way, I think probably Aaron and I are remarkably similar in the autobiographical content, because it's both impossible for me to think about the stories without thinking that every character in the stories is me, in some way. You have to enter into your character to create them. But of course, because they're tales and because of the fairy tale structure, they're kind of subject oriented. So as I went through the couple of years that I was working on this collection, things would happen, or events in the real world would develop, and they became the question, the seed, the germ around which I kind of built a story. So, well, I'm not a prince or the crone or anybody, maybe not even the dog in the stories. I'm very much aware that they wouldn't exist without me being who I am. So
Right.
I think that's probably it. And of course, a lot of the gist, the stuff I use to construct them comes out of my own reading and work in graduate school, and well, when I started reading as a kid too. So yeah, there's a lot of me in the book, even though it's not about me.
Yeah, I don't know how you can spend as much time as I know all of us did with a single thing and not inject a lot of yourself into it.
Yes.
I'm curious on your answer, Mo.
Oh, what's the question?
How much of you has been pushed into the book?
Oh, well, I put all of me into the last book, last trip home, about growing up on the farm in Arkansas. But I did relate to Madeleine, not to her being beautiful and virtuous, because I wasn't either one, but I did relate to her being poor and wanting to be in a better class. And I related to the struggle that she had. I related to the asshole first husband, because my first husband joined the Klan, and used to knock me around because I didn't agree with him, and I finally burned his sheet and left him. But that was Madeleine was more ladylike in her struggle, certainly, than I was. But I did relate to it, and we related a little to the fact that she was in the South, but it was so different. 18th century New Orleans and mid 20th century Arkansas, that was pretty different.
Great question from my brother.
Yeah.
From the brother, yes.
There was a part 2 to that question too, that's for everybody. What is the hardest part of writing / publishing process for you?
Can I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. The hardest part, I think, is trying not to think about what you need to do to get published. You know, it's very important, I think, for every writer, beginner or a very experienced writer, to follow his or her own path, his or her own dream. And my experience with trying to get published, writing to a lot of presses and a lot of agents, was that they want to see that you fit into a certain cubbyhole, a certain slot in the whole marketing scheme. And you know, like as Mo said earlier, I'm not paid to say this kind of thing, but one of the great joys of working with Atmosphere Press is that they didn't have a preconceived idea about what type of fiction they wanted to publish or what type of fiction I should write. So I think the hardest part is just being true to your own idea of what it is you want to say and how you want to say it.
Yeah. Amen. You got to stick to your
Amen.
guns.
I get to stick to your guns.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
have to. And there's a balancing act too between, like I've found, because I happen to be, I happen to have a lot of friends who are writers, creative people, and travel in those circles. And, you know, everyone's got an opinion. Everyone has an idea about process and you know, following through on ideas and things like that. And then invariably the ideas that you may present to them, yourself. And you have to take out of that what you think works, you know, in your idea of where you're heading. Because you can get sidetracked and run down any number of rabbit holes trying to please everyone. And then you realize that the only one you haven't pleased is yourself. And that's when I feel a lot of creative work, that's where it falls off the rails, is when you realize that you just have not followed that inner voice, you know, and, you know, relentlessly.
Yeah.
You know, just relentlessly. You have to please yourself first. It sounds selfish, but it really isn't. Like I view it as you have to be true to yourself. Otherwise, there's no way for you to give to the audience you're aiming for.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's a
It's-
hard thing.
And just sheer perseverance, quite frankly.
Amen.
Someone mentioned, Dave, was it you? Someone mentioned that your book came to you in scenes, or short,
Initially,
like,
yes.
actually in scenes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm the same way. Like, I have a skating scene in my novel. That just came to me. I mean, and I have scenes. So then I get the kernel of the scene down, and then I expand it and then refine it back and forth. And I can't get to the next chapter until I feel like it's as good as it can be. Like any more adjustment would just cause an imbalance and a flaw in another part of the scene, and then move on to the next chapter before that. But it's like I would be washing the dishes or walking my dog, and I'm thinking like, I need to replace that comma or something like that, and then it's like it's weighing on me, you know.
Yeah.
So I came up with this, like, I keep these little booklets with me, but it's just the sheer weight of that, of holding it, and yeah, it's almost like a sport, really. or something.
It really is, you know, and and one other thing, like I'll say about just the nuts and bolts of publishing, getting published, is you have to be ready to fail and fail big time and fail a lot.
Yeah.
You have to be ready to mail that thing out to 50 places and have all of them plus one say nope, and then get right back out there and do it again. It's because as much as anything, there's a piece of luck in it. You have to hit the right person at the right time with the right thing. And the only way that you can generate luck on your side is just to keep at it. It is, you know, I think all of us will say it's about the most frustrating thing ever.
Yeah.
To be a writer with ambitions to be published. Especially if you've gone through, you know, the cycles that I think all of us have probably gone through. I mean,
But I'd hasten to add, those of you out there who are struggling to be a published writer, don't give up.
yeah, you
Don't
can't.
give up.
Yeah, you cannot.
You will
Yeah.
succeed. You will
Yeah,
succeed.
that is it.
Should I answer or should we go?
I think you should
Answer.
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 You've got far and away the most publishing experience.
Oh, that I do. This is the most difficult part for me. The publicity is. Atmosphere Press certainly makes it easier, and every now and then it's actually fun. But the idea of seeing myself on a Zoom screen and seeing the wrinkles and sags and being afraid that somebody will ask me a question and I won't remember the answer, like what's my name? And I've had so many that I'll forget. That's the most difficult part for me. Thank you for not asking me anything about the history that I researched.
We know better.
Yeah.
I have a question for you all, because you all are so, I'm just wondering if you have any kind of history in the theater, because you all read so well and so lively, and you're all so engaging. I didn't know if you had that up your sleeves as well.
Well, you told us to be lively and engaging, so doing our best.
It's in the
Well, just-
contract.
Thank
Just with
you.
like the reading, you know, you guys are great.
A lot of us have teaching experience
Yes.
too. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
being in the
started out-
classroom.
yeah, I started out as an elementary school teacher teaching in French, and then I found myself teaching college freshmen in Kentucky and Louisiana, and then at a college, two colleges here now in Canada. And I've taught such like all ages, so many. I've developed a style, almost a persona that I take on when I teach. But I've taught for so long, and it's sort of become who I am. And then when I turn, it started like an act, and then now it's authentic or something. And so it's the way I teach, actually, to keep people engaged, because a lot of the young people nowadays like focus and attention. I try to be as animated as I can when I teach. It could come from that. I did write one play when I was in college, but that was.
I had a friend in graduate school who said that teaching was essentially where people who couldn't make it in vaudeville ended up. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably what it is.
That would explain a lot of the teachers I had.
It does, yeah.
I actually am kind of lucky. I've had to, in my business, present to large groups of people. It's a part of what I do, and you know, so that has been, you know, valuable experience. You know, stage fright was instinctual to me, because I've also played in bands my whole life, and so getting in front of huge crowds of people would just my knees start shaking, and then you realize a couple of years have gone by and your knees aren't shaking anymore, and then a couple of more years go by, you're like, man, I'm kind of good at this, and then it just becomes so natural, getting up in front of crowds of folks that it's just doing it over and over again.
Yeah.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. I'm taking a look, looking for raised hands. I'm not seeing any. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Nay? Okay. Do you guys have anything that you would like to say?
Just
Thanks
thank
to
you.
everyone for showing
And
up.
thanks for showing
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
Spring Saturday afternoon, no less.
Yeah.
I think someone might be at my front door now, so I better see who it is.
Well, then I'll go ahead and wrap everything up. I
Awesome.
thank you guys so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Lenny.
Yeah.
And
This
Cammie.
was just so great.
Nice job.
And
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your words and your brains and just your love, and the generosity that each one of you brought to us today was just such a tremendous treat, and to learn little tidbits that I didn't know, or it's just so fun. Everyone, don't forget that you can order these phenomenal books via the links in the chat, and please consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for a newsletter, or submit your work. Submit a book manuscript at books@atmospherepress.com. Let us know that you attended today. Say hello, at anything. Just, we dig it. We dig being reached out to.
They
So
do.
Cool. Cool.
we enjoy it. We like talking. So thank you everyone, and
Hi,
let's
Danica.
laugh again and have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Yay.
much, everyone.
Thank
Well done,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Way to go, gang.
Au revoir.
You guys are awesome. Merci.
Thanks, Lenny. Thanks,
Thank
Cammie.
you.
Thanks
Have a
again,
good rest
all.
of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.